Hello and welcome to the Incomplete Guide to Film podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of physical effects or practical effects and CGI. So there is a contingent in the film community that is frankly getting a little tired of CGI. You know, CGI is everywhere. In every summer blockbuster, and even in some places that you wouldn't expect. I was watching a documentary about special effects a while back, and they showed some footage of the show Ugly Betty that was on, early 2000s. And they were demonstrating how they shot exterior shots in New York on a soundstage in a green screen set. They didn't have to film on location because of the advancements that we've made in computer-generated effects. Which, of course, can be very useful, but after a while, things seem to lose their sense of reality when you know for a fact that what you're seeing doesn't exist outside of a computer. So, which is really better? Practical effects, like we saw especially in the 80s, or the CGI of today? Well, the pros of practical effects is you get that tactile, real feeling from them. Watching films like Pan's Labyrinth or The Force Awakens is a good example. They had a lot of practical effects that they used. Another film franchise that uses a lot of practical effects instead of digital is the Hellboy franchise. Also, Guillermo del Toro, just like Pan's Labyrinth. So those are a few modern franchises that are going more for the practical side of special effects. And personally, I enjoy practical effects. I personally enjoy practical effects a lot. I like to watch older movies that are filled with these effects. One of the best franchises, in my opinion, for practical effects is Alien, which I've talked about several times on the podcast. And Alien was able to create a convincing character in a practical way. Yeah, the first movie came out in 1979, and it wasn't really possible to do anything digitally. So they had the artist H.R. Giger come up with an idea for their scary alien. And he came up with a design that has stood the test of time and is still one of the best creatures designs that comes to mind. in my opinion. But that's where practical effects thrive. Practical effects thrive in showing you something that wouldn't really be possible in a very realistic way. I have the collector's edition of the entire Alien franchise, and watching the special features where the filmmakers talk about how they had several different suits depending on what they needed to do, and figuring out how to get the suit to work well underwater and not kill the people inside. And there's a scene in the original film that's very interesting where they have the alien hanging from these chains. And for that scene, they actually hired a guy who did ballet and also acrobatics to hang in the suit from these chains on their set. It's really incredible what they were able to do with the technology that they had. Now, on the other hand, practical effects can sometimes end up looking rather if they're pushed too far. A good example is in Total Recall. The old one with Arnie in it. There's a scene where he's wearing a mask. It's a kind of a tech mask. And he's hiding from some guards, and the guards figure him out. So the mask comes off of his head, and it's pretty obvious that it's a fake Arnold Schwarzenegger head. In no way does it look real. Another time that they failed to make Arnie's head look real is in Terminator. In Terminator, there was a time, I think it was in the first one, there was a time when he had some damage in his eye from one of his fights with Sarah Connor, and they had him doing some maintenance on himself, a little self-surgery. That's no fun. But they had a fake Arnie head that they were actually doing the surgery on, and the reflection in the mirror was actually him. So the fake Arnie head is not very convincing. That's why they only showed the back of it. And another scene, they do show the front of it for a bit, and it's rather plastic looking. And that's when practical effects started to fail. Digital effects were coming more and more into their own, and we had a rough couple years between the two of them, because practical effects were trying to stretch a bit too far, and digital effects couldn't make up the difference. So we had movies like The Crow, where they used some miniatures actually rather poorly for their city, which ended up looking like a Tim Burton-esque cardboard town. And frankly, from the early 90s to the early 2000s, we had some real issues in the effects department. The Alien movie that came out in the 90s, well, both of them suffered a bit from this. Not so much Resurrection, but Alien 3 definitely suffered. There's one scene where they have a totally digital alien running through a hallway, and it looks like someone green screened it in. It's really sad, unfortunately, because in the past they'd shown aliens running around. They could have just put a guy in a suit. It was real easy. They used practical effects later in the film. So it would have been incredibly easy to just have it be the guy in the suit. But no, they had to put the digital one in there, and it just didn't end up going too well. But that film was generally panned because it wasn't great. You can read a bit more about that on my blog because I did a whole... I told the whole story in actually my first blog post. So you can check that out. So what are the pros of CGI? CGI can do a lot that physical can't. We were able to do a lot with little digital that we had. We had space in Star Wars and Star Trek and the Alien franchise and every sci-fi movie from the 80s that had space. None of that was digital. That was them taking video of the miniatures that they made against a set. It was all practical with a little bit of post-production. So the little bit of CGI that we had back then we used very well, but now we've gotten to the point that we can create entire films that are absolutely convincing with not a single human actor on screen. The Rise of the Planet of the Apes and Dawn of the Planet of the Apes movies, there has not been a single ape in it at all. Those are people in motion capture suits that do all the performances on set, and then they use those performances to create the animated apes in the final film. Which is honestly incredible. The fact that they can get it that photorealistic without using a single frame of an actual animal. But it also comes with its own problems. We get a little too CGI. The Transformers movies, I think, is the biggest culprit in this. A lot of times in the Transformers movies, you have no clue what's going on. When those, gigantic robots are fighting, you can't tell who's a good guy, who's a bad guy. It's really difficult to figure out what's even happening because the forms of the characters are literally changing before your eyes on screen during the fight. So it can get a little confusing, and honestly, that kind of stuff puts me right to sleep. Because I can't tell what's going on, so I stop trying to pay attention, and then that's $10 for a movie that I didn't see half of. So, how do we fix it? How do we fix the problems between practical and CGI? Well, the answer is already out there. The key to having outstanding effects is to blend physical with CGI. Do as much as you possibly can physically in camera. And anything that you can't, that's when you move to digital. A movie that did this is the 2011 version of The Thing, which would have been a dodgy remake because The Thing is a classic. You know, the thing from Another World, which I think is the 1952 version, and then 1982's The Thing, directed by John Carpenter, is a cinematic classic. It's a classic film that if you mess it up, you're gonna hear about it. And so the team making the 2011 version had a very difficult job. And here's how they solved it. All of the basis of every effects thing, all of the alien stuff, all of the people turning into aliens, because that's kind of what the thing is about. All of that is practical. And then they add CGI in on top of it to add tentacles and add things that you couldn't really get away with physically, practically. And that's the relationship that practical effects and CGI are supposed to have. CGI is supposed to augment what you do in camera. It's not supposed to be everything that you do in camera, because then it gets maybe a bit cartoony. So keep that in mind for your next high effects shoot. Good day and good filmmaking.